I'm going to tell you something that I have never said out loud before. Not to my friends, not to my family, not even to the therapist who keeps asking me why I look so sad when I talk about my past. Because the truth is, saying it out loud makes it real. And for 3 years now, I've been pretending it wasn't. But the truth is, I ruined the best thing that ever happened to me. I had someone who loved me in a way people spend their whole lives searching for. The kind of love that feels safe, quiet, steady, the kind of love you don't even realize is rare until it's gone. And I destroyed it, not in one big dramatic moment, not with a betrayal or some terrible secret. No, what I did was smaller than that, and somehow that made it worse. I slowly made the person who loved me the most in the world feel like he didn't matter. And the day he finally walked away, he did it so calmly, so gently, that it broke something inside me I don't think will ever fully heal. His name was Aaron. And before I tell you what I did to him, you need to understand the kind of man he was. Because if I just start with the part where I hurt him, you might think this is just another story about two people who grew apart. It wasn't. Aaron wasn't the kind of person you just grow apart from. He was the kind of person who makes life feel lighter just by being in it. I met Aaron when I was 27. At that time in my life, I didn't trust love anymore. Not really. Before Aaron, I had spent almost 4 years in a relationship that slowly wore me down. You know the kind where every argument somehow becomes your fault. The kind where apologies are always one-sided. The kind where you slowly start questioning your own thoughts. By the time that relationship ended, I wasn't just heartbroken. I was suspicious of everyone. Every compliment felt fake. Every kind gesture felt temporary. And every time someone said the words, "I love you," a part of me would quietly think, not for long. I had built walls so high around my heart that even I couldn't see over them anymore. And then Aaron walked into my life, not dramatically, not like in the movies. He didn't walk into a room and command attention. He didn't have that loud, confident energy that fills up space. Aaron was different. He was calm. The first time I saw him, he was sitting by himself at a long wooden table at a small coffee shop. I remember this clearly because everyone else was talking and laughing, but Aaron was just sitting there reading a book, not scrolling on his phone, not trying to look busy, just reading. Like the noise around him didn't bother him at all. The only reason we even spoke that day was because the cafe was crowded and the only empty chair was across from him. So I asked if I could sit there. He looked up, smiled softly, and said, "Of course." That was it. No flirting, no trying to impress me, just kindness. For about 20 minutes we sat there quietly. He kept reading. I kept pretending to work on my laptop. But every once in a while I would notice something strange. Aaron wasn't rushing. Most people in that cafe looked busy, checking the time. Typing fast, running out the door with their coffee. But Aaron moved slowly, not lazily, just peacefully. Eventually he closed his book and asked me something that caught me completely off guard. He didn't ask what I did for work. He didn't ask where I was from. Instead he said, "Can I ask you something a little random?" I laughed and said sure. And then he asked, "What used to make you really happy when you were a kid?" I just stared at him, because nobody asks questions like that, not to strangers. I thought about it for a moment and said, "Riding my bike after school until it got dark." He smiled like that answer meant something important. Then he told me his answer. "Climbing trees," he said. And somehow that small, simple conversation turned into 3 hours of talking. We talked about childhood memories, about books, about fears, about the weird things that keep people awake at night. It was the easiest conversation I had ever had with someone. There was no pressure, no pretending, no performance. When I finally left the cafe that day, Aaron didn't ask for my number right away. He just said, "I come here most Saturdays. If you're ever around, it would be nice to see you again." That was it. And for some reason, that made me want to come back even more. The next Saturday, I showed up again. And he was there, reading another book, sitting at the same table. He looked up when I walked in and smiled like he had quietly hoped I might. That became our routine, every Saturday morning. Coffee, conversation, no expectations, just time. And slowly, without me even realizing it, Aaron started breaking down the walls I had spent years building. Not by trying, not by pushing, just by being exactly who he was. Kind, patient, and unbelievably present. If I told him about something that stressed me out at work, he listened like it actually mattered. If I told him about a bad day, he didn't try to fix it right away. He would just say, "That sounds really hard." And somehow hearing those 4 words made things feel lighter. 3 months later, he finally asked if I wanted to go on an actual date. I remember teasing him about it. I said, "I thought we've been dating this whole time." He laughed and said, "I just didn't want to rush something that felt good." That was Aaron. He never rushed anything. Not conversations, not feelings, not people. And over the next 2 years, Aaron loved me in ways that slowly started healing parts of me I thought were permanently broken. He remembered little things. My favorite tea. The song I liked to listen to on long drives. The way I got quiet when something was bothering me. Sometimes he would leave small notes for me. Nothing dramatic, just tiny pieces of paper that said things like, "Hope today is kind to you," or "Don't forget how strong you are." At first, those notes made me uncomfortable, because I wasn't used to that kind of care. But eventually, they became something I looked forward to, something that made the world feel softer. Looking back now, those little moments were everything. But at the time, I thought they would last forever. And maybe that's the biggest mistake I ever made. Because when something feels constant, you stop noticing how special it really is. And I didn't notice the moment I started taking Aaron for granted. It didn't happen all at once. It happened slowly, quietly. So quietly that by the time I realized what I had done, it was already too late. And the worst part is the moment that finally broke him wasn't even meant to hurt him. It was just one sentence. One careless sentence, said in a room full of people. A sentence that I wish more than anything I could take back. But that's a part of the story I wasn't ready to face yet. Not then. And honestly, not even now. But if you're still here with me, I'll tell you what happened next. Because the way Aaron responded to that moment is something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. If you had asked me back then whether I loved Aaron, I would have said yes without hesitation. And I would have meant it, because I did love him. But love is a strange thing. Sometimes it isn't the big betrayals that damage it. Sometimes it's the small changes you don't even notice happening. The slow shifts, the quiet habits. The little thoughts that start growing in your mind until one day they become the way you see everything. And that's exactly what happened to me. For the first 2 years of our relationship, life with Aaron felt peaceful. Not boring, not dull, just calm in a way that made the world feel less heavy. We built routines without even trying. Sunday mornings were for pancakes. Aaron was surprisingly serious about pancakes. He would wake up early, put music on in the kitchen, and try different recipes like it was some kind of science experiment. Blueberries 1 week, chocolate chips the next. Once he even tried putting cinnamon in the batter, and spent the entire morning asking me if it tasted better or worse. We would eat at the small kitchen table in my apartment, still half asleep, sunlight coming through the window. And those mornings felt simple and good. Another thing Aaron loved was late-night drives. If either of us couldn't sleep, he would grab his keys and say, "Come on. Let's go get some air." Sometimes we would drive for an hour without saying much. Just quiet roads, music playing softly, and the comfort of not feeling alone. Aaron never needed life to be loud to enjoy it, and slowly his calmness started changing me. I slept better, I laughed more. I stopped feeling like every relationship was a temporary thing that would eventually fall apart. For the first time in years, I started believing that maybe love didn't have to be complicated. Maybe it could just be two people choosing each other every day. About a year and a half into our relationship, Aaron proposed, and it happened in the most Aaron way possible. No big setup. No fancy restaurant. No hidden photographers. Just a random Wednesday evening in the kitchen while we were making dinner. I was standing at the counter trying to cut vegetables without crying from the onions. Aaron walked over, leaned against the counter for a moment, and watched me struggle. Then he said, "You know something?" I asked what. And he said, "I think ordinary days with you are my favorite kind of days." Before I could even process what he meant, he pulled a small ring box from his pocket and got down on one knee. Right there on the kitchen floor, I started laughing immediately, not because it wasn't romantic, but because it was so perfectly him. I said yes before he even finished asking. Our wedding happened the following spring. It was small, just close friends and family. Aaron didn't care about the details. Every time I asked his opinion about decorations or colors or music, he would shrug and say, "Whatever makes you happy." And I remember thinking how lucky I was. Some people fight for months while planning a wedding, but Aaron never complained. He never got stressed. He just kept telling me, "I can't wait to marry you." The first year of our marriage was honestly the happiest year of my life. We moved into a small apartment together, nothing fancy. Just a quiet place with big windows and a tiny balcony where Aaron tried, very unsuccessfully, to grow plants. Every time one of the plants died, he would look genuinely sad about it. Then he would buy another one and say, "Maybe this one will survive." And every once in a while, one actually did. Aaron was like that with everything, patient, hopeful, willing to try again. He also kept leaving those little notes. They started appearing everywhere, inside my work bag, on the bathroom mirror, between the pages of books I was reading. Sometimes they just said, "Have a good day." Other times they said things like, "I'm proud of you," or "Don't forget you're amazing." It sounds small, but those notes meant a lot to me. Even if I didn't always say it out loud. But after about 2 years of marriage, something in my life started changing. At first, it felt like a good thing. I got a promotion at work, a big one. The kind of promotion that suddenly puts you in rooms with people who seem very important. New colleagues, new responsibilities, new expectations. Suddenly, my days were filled with meetings and presentations and conversations about things that felt much bigger than my old job. The people I started working with were ambitious, very ambitious. They talked about investments, about buying second homes, about networking with executives, about building impressive lives. And slowly, without even realizing it, I started comparing my life to theirs. At first it was small thoughts, little things that passed through my mind and disappeared. But over time, those thoughts stayed longer. One day at lunch, a coworker mentioned that her husband had just become a partner at his firm. Everyone congratulated her. Another coworker talked about how her husband was launching a new business. Someone else mentioned a luxury vacation they had just taken. The conversation kept going like that. Success stories. Ambition, big plans, and eventually someone asked me a simple question. "What does your husband do?" I smiled and said, "He's a teacher." They nodded politely, and the conversation moved on. But for some reason, that moment stayed in my mind longer than it should have. Aaron was a high school literature teacher, and he loved it. He loved his students. He loved the books he taught. Sometimes he would come home excited because a student who hated reading had finally finished a novel, or because someone in his class had written something beautiful in an essay. He talked about those moments like they were huge victories, and for him, they were. But the more time I spent around my new coworkers, the more I started seeing Aaron differently. Not because he had changed. He hadn't changed at all. I was the one who started looking at him through a different lens. I started noticing things I had never cared about before. His car was old. He didn't care about expensive clothes. He wasn't obsessed with climbing career ladders. Aaron was content, and for the first time, that started bothering me, which is a horrible thing to admit. Because the same peace that once made me feel safe started making me feel restless. I would come home from work full of stories about ambitious people and big ideas. Aaron would listen with interest. He always listened, but when he talked about his day, the stories were different. A student who finally understood a difficult poem, a debate club meeting that went well, a funny conversation in the hallway at school, and one night, without really thinking about it, I said something small, a comment that felt harmless at the time. I said, have you ever thought about doing something bigger? Aaron looked at me for a moment. Not angry, not defensive, just curious. What do you mean? He asked. I shrugged. I don't know, something more ambitious. He smiled gently and said, I like what I do. And that should have been the end of the conversation. It should have reminded me why I loved him. But instead, it irritated me, and I didn't even fully understand why.